my name is Patty Robinson, and I just want to say thank you very much for being here today. As usual, before we start, I like to give a little bit of an introduction to our Civic Dialogue series. I know we have several people. It looks like this is probably their first time that they're joining us, and we just want to make sure you know how this started and what this series is all about. This is our continuation of our fall series, and we are happy to welcome all of you here today. As I said, I'm Patty Robinson. I am the Faculty Director of Civic and Community Engagement at College of the Canyons, and I'm joined by my friend and colleague, Kimberly Rosenfeld, who is the Chair of the Education Department and Chair of Women and Gender Studies at Cerritos College. And unfortunately, Keelan Koenig is not here today, nor is Rebecca Moonstone, but we give a huge shout out to both of them from 3CSN, our California Community Colleges Success Network, for all of their work in helping facilitate this series. We began Civic Dialogues in the fall of 2020. It actually started as part of a Bringing Theory to Practice grant. We had a collaboration with 3 CSUs and 3 community colleges here in California. And because COVID was we were in the midst of COVID, unfortunately, we could not have an in-person training as we had planned. So Kimberly and I had to shift gears very quickly, and we decided, let's put together a speaker series. We thought it would last 1 semester. It is now going into its 3rd year. We have asked and invited some of the most important folks in the world of civic and community engagement in the country. And every single person has said yes to us except 2. The only reason they said no is they had scheduling conflicts. So we have been incredibly fortunate to have this opportunity to bring these amazing scholars, practitioners, and researchers to our dialogue series. Also, just as an FYI, the presentation is being recorded, and the presentation will be uploaded to our 3CSN website, but our YouTube channel. So this way people can go back and actually review the presentations if they'd like to, or ones that you have not seen. So with that, I just want to also mention that the presentation is comprised of 2 parts. The first part includes our speaker today, who Kimberly is going to introduce in just a moment, and then our deep dive afterwards, where those of you who would like to talk a little bit more about what resonated with you with the speaker's presentation, we then go into that deep dive at the top of the hour. Also, our guiding frameworks are to advance an understanding of the intersection between equity, agency, and civic engagement to promote the public good, to recognize civic, community, and democratic engagement as a high-impact practice and how it affects our guided pathways here in California, and then also to leverage participants' current knowledge to build capacity to innovate for local and global change. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kimberly, who is going to introduce our very honored guest today, Dr. Myra Levinson from Harvard University.
Welcome, everyone. I do have a quick housekeeping item. I'm putting a link in the chat for you to sign in, and we'd really appreciate you doing so. And also, any comments you have as Myra speaks today, we would love to collect those and to also use them in our 2nd hour today. So please do that. In the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and read Myra's bio. Myra Levinson is the Juliana W. and William Foss Thompson Professor of Education and Society at Harvard Graduate School of Education. She is a normative political philosopher who works at the intersection of civic education, youth empowerment, racial justice, and educational ethics. A lot of her work is inspired by the 8 years she spent teaching middle school in the Atlanta and Boston public schools. Myra is currently working to start a global field of educational ethics modeled after bioethics that is philosophically rigorous, disciplinary, and experientially inclusive, and both relevant to and informed by educational policy and practice. Myra has written or co-edited 9 books, including Democratic Discord in Schools and No Citizen Left Behind. She also shares educational ethics resources on justiceinschools.org, which I'll include on that Google sign-in sheet, a link to this, rich video materials to support higher education pedagogy on a website called Instructional Moves, and resources for youth activists and teacher allies at youthinfront.org. Each of these projects, like her previous research, reflects Myra's commitment to achieving productive cross-fertilization without loss of rigor among scholarship, policy, and practice. Welcome, Mira.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it, both Kimberly and Patty. So I'm really, really glad to be with you here today. And we're going to do something a bit different from how I think some of these other civic dialogues have gone. And for those of you who haven't been to one before, it's fine. This will just be the way they go. And for those of you who are new to this, for those of you who are experienced with this, it'll just be a somewhat different structure. So what I'd like to do is talk for about 4 minutes about my work actually on the civic dimensions of educational ethics, just to frame it for you a little bit. And then we're actually going to have a case discussion. We'll start actually by watching a video performance of the case, and that will take about 10 minutes. Then I'll give you a copy of the script of the case just so that you have it to refer to. And then we will talk about it. So at that point, I'll actually ask you if you can to turn on your cameras, because this will be a collective discussion rather than me talking at you for about the next 40 minutes. And then I'll wrap up briefly and hand it over to Kimberly and Patty to facilitate the deep dive after I'm gone. Okay? So that's the plan. So to start out with, let me just go ahead and first set up the slideshow. Great. And then I have to find my Zoom window. Perfect. And now I'm going to share screen, which is here. Okay. Great. So I should say, I've worked on issues specifically on civic education for about 25 years. But as Kimberly said in introducing me, in the last decade or so, my interests have been in trying to create this field of educational ethics that I'm trying to get people to call edethics, similar to bioethics. So the idea is, just like bioethics both informs and is informed by issues in the biomedical sciences, public health, biomedical research, et cetera, and actually is seen as being relevant to people's real life work on the ground. Similarly, I'm hoping that we can create a field of edethics that likewise is seen as being relevant to educational policy makers and practitioners, and where policymakers and practitioners feel as if they can turn to edethicists and ask for help, ask for advice, ask for, say, mediation when there are disagreements, actually find useful written stuff. And although I thought then I was sort of leaving behind some of the civic work that I was doing, as you can imagine, over the past decade, there have been many civic issues that have arisen in this country and around the globe that are ethically complex, right? So although the goal again of my initiative right now in edethics is trying to help people talk about the ethical dilemmas they face, understand one another's points of view, find some shared language, and make collective decisions that help to bring about more ethical systems and institutions and policies and educational practices. A shocking number of these issues turn out to have a civic valence to them. So I'll talk about that in a second. And then when we have a case discussion, we're actually going to go into one of these civic cases. But just to sort of describe to you, one of the things that we've been doing for the last decade or so has been creating what I call normative case studies. We emphasize that these are normative case studies, normative just meaning value laden, right? And about the values that we and principles that we hold and that we're trying to achieve in our work, in part because since I'm at Harvard, if I were just to say case studies, I think everybody would think, oh, Harvard Business School case studies. And they have a certain vision of that, and they're like 25 pages long, and they have all of these exhibits, and you have to pay a lot of money for them and things like that. And that's not actually what these normative case studies are. These are short. They're usually about 5 pages. They're designed to be readable in about 10 minutes by a native speaker. They're always empirically researched. Sometimes actually the empirical research can take us like a year to do. They can be very, very, very lengthy. But they are not always then presented as empirical nonfiction cases. And so, for example, the case that we're going to do today in a minute is a fictional case, but you'll be able to see, and I can talk about like where all of the empirical research sort of is built in to inform the fictional case. They're written in ordinary language. We strive to achieve like an 8th grade reading level for them, and we intend for them to be jargon free, and they're almost always focused on a protagonist. It might be an individual protagonist, it might be a group protagonist, who faces a recognizable and challenging ethical dilemma in educational policy and practice. And so we have, where we make these cases available is on our website, justiceinschools.org. And just to highlight for you, we have just some about like civic education in particular. So we have a bunch of cases on the website about, say, tensions over curricular restrictions, which obviously have a very large civic dimension right now, less so in California than in elsewhere in the country. And in fact, the one that we will be talking about today is this third one on the slide, taking the action out of civics. So that's what we will be addressing, but you can see some other here that are about curricular restrictions. And in addition to cases on our website, justiceinschools.org, we also actually have a book, Democratic Discord in Schools, that has 8 cases plus commentaries by a whole bunch of different people, ranging from 8th grade students through activists, lawyers, school superintendents, historians, sociologists, psychologists, political scientists, a whole range of people who have written very short commentaries following the case. And 3 of the, although we've tried to put most of our cases up online on justiceinschools.org to be available for free, and there are right now about 40 cases on there that are freely available. We haven't been able to put all of them up there for free. It kind of depended on when we sort of got a contract to actually turn them into a book, as to what was already up there and what we had to just like publish in the book. So we have some others in the book that are also about curricular challenges, but aren't on the website. And what you can see here, so for example, talking out of turn, Teacher Speech for Hire is a nonfiction case that looks at the speech rights and responsibilities and lack of rights of K-12 teachers in the US. And then we also have a whole bunch of other cases on our website about other kinds of civic challenges. Oh, I realized I copied over something in the water, which I had not meant to do. And some of these come from the US still, so we have ones about school walkouts and other things. You'll be able to see them. We also increasingly have cases available about civic challenges, sort of civic ethical challenges from around the world. So I just highlighted here a case from Australia looking at sort of civic memory around Anzac Day in a school that has a bunch of newcomers, refugees. A case from the UK based on, again, each of these is based on an empirical example, although those actually are fictionalized for various reasons around the question about whether to use the cartoons that were published in Charlie Hebdo that mock the Prophet Muhammad as a way of actually trying to combat Islamophobia. And then you can see with the parallel universe, it turns out that Germany has a conspiracy theory there that's kind of similar to QAnon. It's different, like it's, but but it sort of plays similar roles in a question about what one does if you have a very compelling and very smart student who's busy spouting these conspiracy theories, and how to address it as a teacher and as a school. So those are examples of some of the normative case studies that we have online that sort of intersect in the civic and ethical areas. And what I thought we would do now for the rest of our time together is actually engage in one of these case study discussions, because not only are these cases about civic challenges in education, but they are designed to actually support democratic dialogue across lines of difference in a way that is nuanced and complex about these kinds of challenging civic and ethical dilemmas. So in a way, you can think of it as like a meta thing, right? So it's about these civic ethical challenges, but then the kind of conversation that we hope to support with them itself is designed to actually support democratic discourse and dialogue, not necessarily to reach shared conclusions about things. Actually, all of the cases that we write only if we're not sure actually what one should do. Like they're intended to be real dilemmas. And I will say, if any of you are classicists, I realize that dilemma suggests that it's like a binary, it's a one or the other. We just haven't found a word in the English language that's good for sort of being like, we could use multi-lemma, but that really would be jargony. So when I talk about dilemmas, you should just think about sort of a challenge where somebody has to make a decision about a course of action, and you can't realize all of the values that you care about at once, like the important values or principles at once. So that's what I mean when I say dilemmas. So so the rest of the time I'm going to, most of these cases are designed to be read. And again, as I said, they should be able to be read in about 10 minutes by a native English speaker. A number of the cases on the website, actually, we also have readers' theater versions of them. So it means that we've scripted them into sort of performable scripts where you can just hand them out to the class and get students to volunteer, or you can volunteer students who you think will be good at this to perform the case. And that tends to take usually about 12 or 13 minutes. Just we shorten it some because spoken word is, takes longer than reading. And then a couple of these cases, we actually were able to get funding in a partnership with ethical schools to turn them into acted out cases. You will notice that people are in Zoom boxes because we got the funding, and then lo and behold, COVID hit. And so these performances are not in a shared physical space, but they are by actually some professional actors / acting students from California who we were really, really glad to get hooked up with. So hopefully you will at least enjoy it. So what I'm going to do right now is play for us the case taking the action out of civics. And I will say, I'm putting it on 1.25 speed just so that it takes more like 11 minutes than 14 minutes for us to watch. If it feels too fast to you, please just put that in the chat, and then I'm happy to change the settings and put it at normal speed, okay? And I'll just keep an eye on the chat, but we'll watch the case, and then I will actually give you a link to the script so that when we talk about the case, you have that to refer to. All right, any questions or concerns about that before we get started? Great. The other thing I'll say is that normally for accessibility reasons, I would turn on the captions too while it was playing, but I discovered that the captioner, I don't know why, but our professionally done captions did not get uploaded to the video that I was able to find. And so these captions are only like 85% correct. And I think that's just way too confusing and distracting. So again, if you want the captions on, put it in the chat and I'm happy to turn them on, but they are not ideal. So I'm going to leave the captions off. And then again, you can have the script at the end of it, or if you want the script during it, happy to do that too. All right, let me just get over to here. Great. So I'm going to share my screen again. There we are.
Even after 20 years of teaching, the first day of school was still exciting for Emily Wilson, Social Studies Department Chair at Central High School. The school year wouldn't start for students until next week, but staff were back on campus for meetings. Emily opened her email. Scrolling through her messages, she read, "Have you seen this?" The email linked to an opinion piece from the local newspaper, written by John Warner, parent of a rising Central junior.
Kids once went to school to learn reading, writing, and arithmetic, not anymore. Central High School now requires action civics, better described as protest civics. In their history classes, students learn to stage walkouts and protests directed by left-wing educators who use teenagers' temper tantrums for their own political ends. It's indoctrination, and I refuse to stand for it.
Emily felt the attack keenly. She imagined defending the program to Mr. Warner.
I introduced the Action Civics model to Central myself last year. It was a big success at my old school, and I'm excited that all Central juniors participate. In Action Civics, students examine their community and identify issues that need solving. They choose which issue to focus on. They do research about their chosen issue and look at the systems that contribute to presenting the problem. With school and community partners, they plan some action to create change. It could be organizing a protest, but it could also be creating a public service announcement or making a presentation to the principal or the school board. And students constantly reflect on what they're learning about the government, about community, and about themselves. Sure, the process doesn't always run smoothly. I know we got some pushback, as you note, Mr. Warner, disagreements happen about the root causes of problems or which action to take. And of course, the students don't always create change. But these challenges make Action Civics valuable. Students see different viewpoints and see the issues in more complex ways. They gain public speaking skills and learn to navigate spaces of power. I remember one student told me, "This project taught me that I shouldn't be afraid to stand up for what I think is right. It taught me that anyone has the ability to affect change, no matter who they are." What else do you have to say, Mr. Warner?
Parents must band together to fight this indoctrination. The next school board meeting is 2 weeks from tomorrow. Join me for a conference this Saturday at the New Hope Presbyterian Church, organized by local groups that share my concerns as we plan to make our message heard. I am the tip of the sword. There are many others behind me.
The subject came up quickly at the department meeting that morning.
We need to talk about this. Across the country, Action Civics is being lumped in with a host of so-called controversial theories that parents are up in arms about. We can't just ignore this article and hope that protesters won't show up at the school board meeting. For all we know, there will be news cameras with them.
I actually think the article makes some decent points. You might remember that I expressed doubts about Action Civics this time last year. These projects take time away from learning real history.
I remember your doubts, Jim, but your students really enjoyed the project, right?
Sure, yeah. All kids enjoy working with their friends and leaving school to visit city council. But we're in a crisis of civic ignorance. Only half of Americans can name all three branches of government. I've been teaching civics longer than anyone here, and trust me, it's not the right time to be experimenting with civics education.
Those statistics show that the traditional curriculum doesn't work well, and we know it particularly doesn't work well for people like me. Actually, civics is good for all kids, but especially for Black kids, for Latino kids, and for other kids from marginalized groups. Actually, civics help them see themselves in curriculum. They get to focus on problems that feel relevant for them and their families.
But not all those families support Action Civics. One of the stories in the article came from my class. One group was doing a project to raise awareness of income inequality, and we had a discussion about whether meritocracy is a myth. A Black mother called me the next day, furious, because she felt I had told her son that however hard he worked, he'd never succeed the way white people did. She said he felt like he'd always be a victim. I managed to reestablish a good relationship with the student and the mother, but it was painful for all of us. I mean, who am I to tell a Black family I know more about racism than they do? As a brand new teacher, too.
I remember that, but you know that mom doesn't speak for all Black families. Class discussions like this are valuable.
Look, Action Civics causes problems between parents and kids too, not just parents and teachers. I had one student last year, incredible athlete, looking at the controversy around transgender kids playing sports. Her parents are religious and don't support transgender rights. The girl was so worried she'd get into trouble at home that she switched groups to work on a pro-life project. But before she switched, she spent days in a panic. Kids shouldn't be tackling these issues, riling everyone up and stressing themselves out.
The problem isn't the issues. The problem is the pushback.
Yeah, well, more pushback is coming, assuming we keep the project. I certainly support dropping it.
Thoughts swirled in Emily's head as she walked back to her office. But any decision about the Action Civics project didn't ultimately rest with her. Rhonda Williams, curriculum coordinator for the district, would make the final call. So Emily forwarded Mr. Warner's opinion piece to Rhonda, asking about the discussion at the district office. A knock at the door from Principal Dan Ritchie interrupted her work.
I'm guessing that you saw John Warner's opinion piece?
I did. I know we got some pushback last year, but I honestly wasn't expecting anything like this.
I've heard complaints from Mr. Warner before. A few years ago, he objected to a book with a same-sex kiss. Of course, it was a different world back then. Nowadays, we see security escorting protesters from school board meetings or even arresting people. And Mr. Warner didn't try to pull another parents that time, not that I remember.
I was surprised by how many of the parent complaints we got last year were in his piece.
The whole city's more polarized than ever. My wife's on the city council, and she says their meetings get pretty heated. I don't even want to imagine our school board meetings, or any city meetings, filled with protesters shouting and news cameras everywhere. It's a real safety threat.
I don't want to imagine that either.
Maybe there's some way to make these projects less political. Maybe some approved topics for students to choose from, topics that aren't so controversial.
That would undermine a key purpose of Action Civics. Students choose issues that matter to them, and many of those issues are political.
Maybe changing what students are allowed to do. They could write letters to the editor or have a class debate.
That takes the action out of Action Civics. Action Civics empowers students in a way that those traditional activities don't. They get to choose how they present their message.
I understand, but a lot of parents don't want their empowered children learning to plan walkouts. Those parents deserve a say in their children's education. Besides, you know we've been dealing with budget cuts. The last thing the superintendent wants is a costly lawsuit from angry parents. Central is different from your old school, Emily. I just don't think we're ready for something as divisive as Action Civics here.
An hour later, Diane Johnson appeared in the doorway.
Was that Dan I saw in here a while ago?
Yes, I'm sure you can guess why he came. Yesterday, I thought the Action Civics project was a key part of the American history curriculum. Now I have parents, teachers, and administrators telling me otherwise.
You've also got parents and teachers telling you differently. Check out the Central Parents Facebook page.
Mr. Warner certainly has plenty of supporters. Listen to this. Kids need to learn before they become activists, so they have informed opinions.
Well, you also are focusing on the wrong parts. There are parents who support Action Civics like this too. Like my son hated history for years, but his project changed all that. Now he wants an intern at the State House. I just wish he'd done the project years ago.
But listen to this. Maybe the school board isn't the right place to fight. We should talk to our state representatives. Some places have already banned Action Civics. What if we become the school that inspires a new law here banning Action Civics for the whole state? There are well-funded groups behind parents like Mr. Warner. They could make a lot of noise in the Capitol.
It's a risk we have to take. I've seen this too often here. We do something that challenges the status quo and people get nervous. And suddenly we don't teach that book or do that project anymore. We decide to wait until people feel ready. We've made a lot of statements about equity and justice recently, but I don't see those statements turning into action. We have a chance to stand for equity here.
Can I come in? Of course. We're just talking about the Action Civics project.
That's why I came. I want to drop the project this year. I'm not eligible for tenure until next year, and I'm worried my contract won't be renewed if anything goes wrong in my classes. But maybe you could still do it in your classes?
We'll talk more about it at our one-on-one meeting.
Katie nodded and headed out the door.
I imagine Rhonda won't want just some classes doing Action Civics. Curricular alignment matters to the district.
Besides, Katie teaches 3 general ed sections. We don't want Action Civics to become something only AP kids do.
True. I have to see what they're thinking at the district office. It's a lot to consider.
After Diane left, Emily woke up her computer to find a response from Rhonda.
I did see that article. I've been fielding a lot of questions at the office about Action Civics. The press attention definitely has some people nervous here, so we'll have to decide how far we push this issue. There may be some rebranding we can do to placate the dissenters. And of course, Action Civics isn't the only way to shake up the curriculum. The money we have budgeted for the project could fund a guest speaker maybe, or a new field trip. It's something to think about. Come by the office this afternoon to let me know where you stand.
Where do I stand? Should I push to keep Action Civics unchanged in the curriculum and risk a firestorm of protests and press coverage? Should I just accept that the timing isn't right at Central? Is there some middle ground, a way to keep some core of Action Civics while softening the more controversial pieces? What will I tell Rhonda this afternoon?
Okay, so that is the case that we're going to spend some time talking about. And what I'm going to do now is put the link to the Reader's Theater in the script in the chat there. So why don't you see if that works? Is that working for people? I noticed that it went in not, oh yes, all right, I got a thumbs up from Kimberly. Great, it looks like it's not hyperlinked, so you may just need to copy it and then paste it in your browser. Oh, thank you, Kimberly, that's better. Great. All right, and then, there's the link to the script. And I'm going to, all right. One note is that you'll see that the script actually says Darren for the character who we call in the video Diane. We'd written the script before we got the actors, and so we actually changed her name because we ended up getting a female actor to play that part. So just sorry about that confusion there. We actually need to update the script. So if you wouldn't mind now turning on your cameras, if at all possible. What I'm going to invite you to do is to think about for like 2 minutes, and then I'll start inviting you to make some suggestions about what dilemmas do you see arising in this case and for whom. And as a reminder, a dilemma is, we're going to treat right now, not being, since I'm not a classicist, as being a decision that one needs to make where there is no way to satisfy all important values and principles that you hold fully, no matter what decision you make. All right, so there are some quite clear dilemmas, like, focus of the case, say for Emily. There are some, I think, other dilemmas that arise. So if you'll just take 2 minutes to think about it, jot it down on a piece of paper, your computer, whatever, and then I'll start inviting people to share the dilemmas that they've come up with. Okay, any questions? Great, go for it. Okay, take 30 more seconds. Okay. Who would be willing to get us going? Terrific, thanks. Melissa, go for it.
Sorry, there's a baby rolling around crying right now.
Totally fine. We welcome babies.
Sorry about that. But one of the things I put, which is like, you know what? I'll go in a second. I'm sorry.
Okay, yeah, totally fine. Fabiola, I noticed you had you had turned on your video right when it was time. Do you have one that you're willing to share with us?
I don't know if you can hear me. I'm at a Starbucks. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I guess for me it would be Katie, that she was worried that her contract wouldn't be renewed. And I don't know, I feel like that's stuck out for me, maybe because I just started my teaching job. So as someone who's just starting, I feel like I don't feel the confidence or confident enough to present ideas to my bosses yet.
Yeah. Great, thank you. Yeah. So in ways we actually have, I think you're identifying two dilemmas for Katie, possibly. One is, should she take the risk to teach a controversial curriculum, maybe one that she believes in, but given that she feels so vulnerable since she doesn't have tenure? And even the second one, which is, should she even take the risk to bring up her concerns to her more veteran colleagues, to the principal, potentially to Rhonda, right? Like, when does she speak up? Yeah, thanks, Fabiola. I really appreciate it. Melissa, are you back?
I'm back. Yes, sorry
Hey,
about that.
no problem.
So a dilemma I definitely saw was, the point of education. We have so many different courses is to have well-rounded students. So it's like, how do you balance like the whole point of education, keeping students and allowing them to think for themselves and be well-rounded versus like a parent's right to parent and decide like what my kids should be learning. And they're not part of education, but it's still their kid. So it gets in that sticky space.
Great. And for whom do you see this as being a dilemma?
I would say everybody. It's a dilemma for the students because I'm so sorry, everyone.
No, we don't hear the baby, and it's fine if we do.
Yeah, it's messy because the students, I feel like, get stuck between what they're learning at school and their parents' influence. The parents are worried about what their students might be learning. And then, of course, the teachers have that pushback.
Great. Thank you. Other dilemmas that arise for you? Patty, go for it.
Oh, I'm sorry. Emma, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Emma.
No, Patty, then Emma. It's fine.
Okay.
We have time.
So one of the things that really struck me, and I saw this from the very beginning, it's sort of the dilemma of how do you teach? Do you stay with a traditional way that we have taught for centuries, or do we start looking for alternatives? And I think that the one woman, I forgot what her name, when she said, but she mentioned the son, I think it was her son who learned, my son didn't like history, but now wants to participate in state government or be involved in like an internship or something. So again, I think that's a dilemma that we see in higher education.
And is that a dilemma for teachers, for professors, for others?
I think it's probably for both the professors as well as for the institutions themselves, because institutions are going to have that opportunity if they try and make drastic changes. And I love this term civic or action civics, which to me seems really, it's a term that I don't get upset about, but I was surprised when people do hear it and it's like, oh my gosh, no, it's too political, it's too this, it's too that. So I think what you have is the institution itself has to be careful, because will that affect funding? Will that affect how stakeholders then support the institution as well?
Yeah, great, thanks. Emma, I think you're muted.
My answer is a little unfocused, but because I teach sociology, we deal with social problems of our times, and it can be very controversial because it can students can have values that are clashing. So what I do, I make sure in the beginning of the course that I'm not here to change your mind. I'm here to give you the opportunity to see the issues from wider worldwide view, to earn a worldwide view and see issues from both sides. And so that that opportunity is my to bring that opportunity is my responsibility. So I make that clear, and I say that there is no wrong view. All views are out there for a reason, and all views are welcome in this classroom. And that's how I deal with the contemporary issues. But as far as like having a method of teaching, I am sort of mixing both traditional as well as the modern way, or more to give them opportunity for application.
So Emma, can I ask you a question? In ways, what I'm hearing from you is, I don't face this dilemma because I know how to solve it. And I'm curious, leaving aside your own setting for a second, do you think that the teachers in the case just don't face a dilemma? Because if they would simply say, oh, we're not here to indoctrinate kids, we welcome all views, and that's why we're here, there is in fact no dilemma? Or do you agree with Melissa, who had said that she saw, say, a real dilemma that faced by everybody about like what it meant to teach a well-rounded education, versus say parents, when parents speak up and say, no, I don't want my kids learning that. So I'm curious, do you disagree that there's a dilemma, or do you see this?
I never came across a situation to experience it firsthand. But as I'm thinking about it, obviously I belong to one of those views, one of those sides, but I try to not show that, so that I'm not imposing anything on the student, letting them to be free to express that. So that's my dilemma. That can be my dilemma.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't have to be a dilemma for you. I do see it as being a dilemma for teachers in the case and for students in the case, in part because even though they take this open stance, clearly, say, John Warner, the parent, is not perceiving an open stance to be, he perceives it as being indoctrinatory. And say the kid in, I think, Jim's class, who had started out about transgender rights and then switches to, I think, abortion restrictions, I don't quite remember, right to life or something. Clearly, she's worried about her own parents' judgment about what she's doing. So I think it may be that you are quite lucky not to experience this as a dilemma. I guess I do see the teachers in the case as facing these challenges because not everybody in their school or in their community actually interprets them as being like open, honest brokers. But Kimberly, you've had your hand up for a while. I'm curious what's on your mind.
Oh yeah, I just wanted to jump in here. I almost see this as an academic freedom issue. And I know K-12 has, they have boards of trustees, as we all do, even in community colleges, but I do feel it's like probably the dilemma is most for the faculty, if I had to pick one group. And I do feel that, there's pushback, there's fear of pushback versus exerting one's right for academic freedom. And I think it's very real to worry about your job. And I think it's very real to worry about other impacts on your career, stepping out and doing civics kind of work that's out in the community. In terms of, it reminded me of another thing, the banned book issue, right? We have these banned books that keep coming in and circling through. They're banned or they're not banned. But also I'm thinking, the indoctrination part, I suppose I could see that if a faculty were saying, well, I really want you to go to this political party and do this. But if there's a constructivist approach and the students have choice, and the students are in groups or on their own, choosing the kind of action, the where, the when, the how, the political party, if any, then I think that kind of takes away that indoctrination accusation.
Well, what about if the indoctrination accusation is made anyway, right? Which is what I hear, say, John Warner making.
I would love to have a conversation with John Warner for that to be supported with the kinds of examples of what the students are doing in the class. And if there's a variety of examples and they were led by student choice, I just don't think it would hold up.
Great. Yeah. Thanks, Kimberly. I'm curious, let's get a couple more voices, people we haven't heard from, dilemmas that you see on the table that we haven't named yet. Yes, go for it, Clinton.
So I have two I think I could do real quick. First one I'd say is for the faculty, particularly I guess the department chair, and it would be how to distinguish action civics as an apolitical process or curriculum. Because there's definitely some conflation going on, right? On the side of John Warner, he's saying, well, this is another attempt at indoctrination, and he's lumping action civics in with some other things. They don't actually name it, but I'm assuming they're talking about things like CRT or trans rights or some of these other, things that I think have become politicized because you see in the media and the commentary, everybody's sort of taken a stand and made it part of their political platform, and so now they're perceived as being political issues when really they're I think ethical or moral dilemmas about how we treat one another. The other one I would throw out for consideration is I see a dilemma for the school board. So I've been a school board chair at a K-8 district. I've served as a VP and a dean at different community colleges. And so they're really in this chair where they have to choose, right? Are we going to side with our faculty and sort of stand up for them and their academic freedom? Are we going to side with our parents who could potentially, going back to that fear of losing your job, they could potentially vote us out of office and, elect other more conservative school board members. And I find that often in my career when I'm in that chair where I have to, choose between conflicting sides, that's a losing role when you sit in that chair, and it's a very difficult position to be in, to have to carefully and thoughtfully choose a course of action when you're sort of picking a preference for serving one group over another group potentially.
Great, thank you. I appreciate this. One question, Clinton, is you described action civics as an apolitical curriculum. I don't
know much about action civics. I'm definitely not schooled in this area. I'm not.
Yeah, no, that's fine. And all you need. No, really, I wanted to ask you. I'm not sure if apolitical would be. I mean, it is getting students engaged, but maybe like non-ideological or non-partisan. And one thing I think that's can be important as we think about our work as educators is, a lot of our work is arguably political, without necessarily being partisan. There's a great book by Diana Hess and Paula McAvoy called The Political Classroom that I strongly recommend. It's about the ways in which sort of inevitably our work actually should be one of political education insofar as, we're trying to educate citizens, right? Whether or not they're legal citizens, everybody who is in this country has civic rights and responsibilities of various kinds. But that doesn't mean that we need to be partisan, right? And we should arguably be nonpartisan even as we're political. Great, thank you. I really appreciate this. Anything else that we're leaving on the table? And I will say there are some that I'm curious about with respect, or thinking about with respect to issues of equity, with respect to sort of students and parents relationships, and actually Emily's own sort of suggestion to Rhonda. So I'm curious, anything that you haven't heard that you had jotted down or is on your mind? Ed, go for it.
I am sorry, I'm home with COVID, so I'm a little.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm not a beacon of clarity right now, but just speaking from the point of view of the teacher in a classroom where you're likely, you're the oldest person in the room, you're male, you're white, you're maybe one of the only white people in the room, and you're bringing up stuff about issues about feminism and civil rights and things like that. It seems like that's a dilemma sometimes, I guess, it came up in the video with the woman talking about the Black mother and of the students who felt like she was trying to educate her about what it's like to be Black, and I don't know if it's so much. I guess it's a dilemma for the teacher how far to go with that. I don't really have the same view as Emma on the idea that all views are acceptable in my classroom. Some views, some really extreme views are unacceptable in the critique. Bullying is unacceptable, things like that. And so I think the way I found my way through the dilemma is just to voice that I have this dilemma.
Great, thanks, Ed. Let me tell me if this is right. I'm actually going to, so I hear one of the dilemmas, the first dilemma that you raised, just generalizing slightly from the identity of a white teacher as being, how do we as educators, or, dilemma for the educators, how do they take their own visible and non-visible identities into account when they educate, and how do they account for students' diverse identities, and how much do we sort of presume or try to reach across certain kinds of identity lines with race, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, citizenship status, ability, et cetera. And how much do we account for how others are going to perceive of how our identities are influencing our teaching, right? So, we have this example, say, of Katie, the young white teacher, being reamed out by one of her students' parents for, as her student's parent perceived it, teaching her kid that he was just going to have to work twice as hard and that things were stacked against him, et cetera. Of course, we also know there's a lot of research showing that educators of color are often especially vulnerable to being, critiqued by parents, to being about the evaluations are on average often worse, et cetera. So all sorts of questions about how our own identities play into the classroom. And then the second dilemma that you raised about what views should be treated as acceptable in the classroom. And that, I think, you raised as a dilemma for teachers, also as a dilemma between teachers and parents if they have different judgments, right, about what should be, and students about what should be treated as acceptable in the classroom.
Yeah, I agree with that synopsis. The thing about teaching at community colleges, though, if your students are adults, then you don't really have to take the parents' opinion into consideration, although you might have some students who aren't quite yet adults, and you might not know that. And so now, can you show I teach photography, can you show an image of someone who's nude? Like, now it's a problem,
Yeah, and it may be that with community college you have, you're not quite so worried about parents, although one thing I heard you saying, Clinton, was that in a role as, say, a community college administrator, taking the views of the public or of state officials or the board or something into account may play a similar role as, say, the parents are playing in this case. Is that right? I'm seeing lots of nodding from Patty. All right, I want to shift us. So we've named a whole bunch of different dilemmas. I am curious, one of the things that I said that I think that talking about these cases can do is help people talk across lines of difference about complex civic and ethical challenges that we face. Can you take 2 minutes to choose a character in the case with whom you might feel least connected or least sympathetic, and put in the chat the name of the character and what values you think are motivating them and why? Okay, I'll put this prompt in the chat so you can see it. But again, choose a character with whom you don't immediately feel some affinity. And think about what values do you think are motivating them in this case and why? All right. And I'll say, why don't you type it in, but don't press enter until I tell you to. Okay, take 30 seconds to finish up, and then I'll tell you when to press enter.
Do you want our message to go to you or everyone?
No, to everyone. Thank you, because we're going to read each other's. All right, when you're ready, go ahead and press enter. And I'm going to, Patty, I'm going to call you out only because you have the status that I figure you can deal with this. What I see you doing is totally being unsympathetic to Jim and telling what he's not willing to. I'm curious what you think, why you think he's doing this. What values, in fact, motivate him? Not what doesn't motivate him, but what does motivate him.
If I had to think in terms of what's motivating him, I think he is motivated by consistency, sort of the same thing that he has done maybe semester after semester. He's not willing to take a risk. Maybe it works for him. Maybe the way that he teaches, he sees the value. I just think that I don't see him being open or responsive to something different.
All right, I'm going to reframe this for you.
Okay. Because
So
I'm very critical of him.
Because in addition, right, so I see like fear of change from Ed, which is, again, I don't think necessarily a value, right? I mean, although Patty, as you were phrasing it, there might be a value of being conservative, right? Of sticking to things that feel tried and true. I also think if we look at the script, he has a pretty strong sense of values about mastering civic knowledge, right?
Yes.
And that he's concerned that, that when he's like, action civics, of course they love working with their friends and skipping school, right? But like kids don't know stuff. So I would say that he has a very strong set of values about civic learning in terms of civic knowledge. I think he also is concerned about helping parents and helping students feel safe in their learning, right? So when he raises up the girl who had felt that she had to change her project, kids shouldn't be tackling these issues, riling everyone up and stressing themselves out. I see that as an expression of care of a certain kind.
and I think for me, I probably wasn't going into it that deeply, to be really honest. I think what was it that struck me as sort of the first thing when I went back and I was just thinking which character really stood out in my mind. And it was the way that I think it was just his opposition to how she was presenting something that in my mind was really get students out and have them become hands-on, get them involved and get them into that application. So I think, but I agree with you. Yeah, I mean, if you dig deep into what he said, he does care. And he obviously has that concern about the civics and getting students to learn. And I think certainly the example you just said, he is also concerned about the well-being of the students. And so again, I was just really looking at that. He's just not willing to see that she's going in a different direction and that there's value to what she wants to do.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that's really hard about our civic life right now, right? Is that I think so. One of the reasons that I invited you all to do this is because I think we have been socialized recently to see what those with whom we disagree are denying to us or to those we care about or others, the ways in which they feel like impediments and as if they are against values that we stand for. And part of the reason that we create these case studies is also to try to help us recognize that many, many times those with whom we are in opposition, with whom we may fundamentally disagree, are not just trying to make our lives worse, and they're not immoral, and they are actually also operating out of strongly held political and moral and ethical convictions of values that in the abstract we may recognize, like protection of kids, supporting family, child-parent relationships, an attitude of care, a commitment to learning and to knowledge, a commitment to not changing things too quickly, to protecting, the school, right? And that I think if we can start to name those values and principles, it doesn't mean that we are then like, okay, you're right, let's kill Action Civics, forget it, right? But it does help us relate to one another, I think it potentially in a more respectful way, and to start to appreciate the complexity of the civic world that we live in as we think of ourselves about what role we're going to play as educators, what roles we play with our students, how we have conversations with others. So this is actually going back to, I don't remember who it was, I think it was either Melissa or Kimberly maybe, who said, I would want to have a conversation with Mr. Walsh and see like why he's concerned about this and show him the range of projects, et cetera, and try to show him, look, this is fine. And that openness to conversation, I think, is really important. And we need to also think about, all right, what do we do when either Mr. Walsh won't talk to us, right? Or when there are lots of Mr. Walshes, or when do we say, well, this is enough of a conversation? But also, when do we invite people into conversation? Because I think, and make a point of listening to them as much as they hope that they'll listen to us. Still, that doesn't mean that we're so open-minded, that our brains fall out, or that, and we may be very firmly committed to certain ideals. But this is one of the things that we actually do with these cases often, is use them as a way of trying to help people have conversations across lines of difference, to at least appreciate that often we are all ethically motivated, even as we disagree. And it's not then to paper over the disagreements or necessarily to reach consensus about what to do. But I do think we would be a healthier democracy and a healthier society if we recognize that others are often have legitimate ethical motivations, even as they seem wrong-headed to us. All right, I've gone on much longer than I intended, and I also need to jump off. So I'm going to leave this in your hands. I'll be very curious to hear say from you, Patty or Kimberly, what ends up happening in the next 52 minutes. I will say also, just as I'm leaving, you can find all these, resources on justiceinschools.org. And I will say that if you go to the Taking the Action Out of Civics page, in addition to there being the case video that I just showed you, we also have a conversation that I facilitated with 4 very different people, including somebody who's quite skeptical of Action Civics, Robert Pendicio from the American Enterprise Institute, an 8th grade teacher in Ohio, the policy director for Generation Citizen that's all in on Action Civics, and then a colleague of mine, Fernando Reimers, who's a really amazing civic education professor at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, talking about this case. So after you guys continue talking, however you do, you might find it interesting on your own time to look at that. And thank you very much for inviting me and hosting me.
Thank you very much, Mira. This has been a real honor and a pleasure. And this is great. I mean, this is just a wonderful tool that you have given us. And I know Kimberly and I are going to be able to really talk about it more in this next hour. So thank you so very much for joining us today, and take care.